Hey everyone, and welcome to a new video. This is about the JSUI object, which is an object that we have in Max that allows us to create custom interfaces. As this one, for example, a very simple two-dimensional slider, which is what we are going to achieve in this video. So the JSUI object uses JavaScript, that's why it's called JSUI, uses JavaScript to create graphics in 2D or even 3D that we can then display in this window. So it is a bit like using a JIT world object with the GGL sketch object, kind of similar to that. But it's only one package and offers us some cool stuff. So as always, let's start from scratch. This stuff I will leave, and I will delete all my code. So the first thing we need is to create a new JSUI object. So as we say, this is called JSUI. You just create a new object, you type that in, and this object appears. This is kind of the default file loaded when you create a new JSUI. And as you can see, this is some sort of pie slider thing. It's pretty cool, but we want to load our custom file. So in order to change the file, we need to create a new file. So we just choose your editor of choice. You can even use, for example, TestEdit if you want. You create a new file, and then you give it a name. For example, I called my JSUI tutorial01.js. I guess it's kind of important that you give it the JS extension. So from the inspector of the JSUI object, we can go here where it says file name. We go choose, and I go grab it from my desktop. There it is. Since it's empty, it's simply just going to keep the old drawing that it did before. Cool. So there are two ways we can draw things in a JSUI object. One way is to use the sketch object, which is very similar, basically the same as GGL sketch. And the other way is to use a system called MGraphics, which basically it's a bit like working with vector graphics. And it also just does 2D graphics. While Sketch can do 3D graphics, with MGraphics we can only do 2D graphics, I guess. So actually we're going to start with MGraphics because this is kind of the most intuitive way, I think, to draw things, and it's pretty cool and useful, so we're going to go with that. So inside our JavaScript file, the first thing we need to do is to initialize our MGraphics system. So we have to write exactly these words, MGraphics, oh, not that, so MGraphics.init. Then we need to choose if we want relative chords or absolute chords. Let me write this down, so relative chords. This we have to set it either to 1 or 0. Now relative chords means if we say 1, it means it's going to use normalized coordinates, like if this was a JIT world object. So like if we were in a 3D world. So the 0 will be in the center, and epsilon will go from 1 to -1, and the x will go between the minus ratio of the window to plus ratio of the window. Otherwise, if we say relative chord 0, we are simply going to work with pixel coordinates. So this will be the pixel 0, 0, and this will be the pixel at coordinates of the size of the window. So we are going to go with relative chord 0 because we want just to work with the pixels coordinates. So coordinates relative to the size of the box in pixels. And then there is another option that we have to set, which is the autofill attribute. Now, if we say autofill, it's simply going to fill any drawing command that we will write. If we write 0, it's not going to do that. I'm going to write 0 because I don't want it to autofill all the drawing commands. Good. Now, we need to declare a function here. So this is a function that is going to be called by the object automatically, and this must be called paint. So this is a function that is called by the object to draw the window. So it must contain all our drawing calls. As you can see, once I declared it, the object started to draw, and since there is nothing inside, it just draws emptiness. And this function must be written exactly like this. It must be called paint. How do we know which functions are available inside the MGraphics system? Of course, we can go inside the Max reference. We look for JSUI, then we go in the documentation, the JSUI object, and here there is a list of all the functions that are available by default inside the JSUI object. Like, for example, all the stuff that deals with the mouse, which we're going to see in 1 second. But if we go online to this page, Max JavaScript reference from teamshank.da, This is kind of the JavaScript reference for Max, which you can find online. There is also a voice, which is MGraphics, and this will tell us all the stuff we need to know about the object, all the properties that it has, all the methods that it has, and yeah, there is also a description of the paint function, which is what we need. I don't know if this is the same for the sketch, but for MGraphics, we definitely need this paint function. Good. So paint function it is. Now let's say that we want to draw a rectangle inside our window. So we're going to go like this. We have to say MGraphics, because this is all functions, all methods of MGraphics. We have to set the source color, so set source RGBA, which means we are going to set the color for the next pattern we are going to draw, because this works with patterns, which means we can create patterns and then assign them colors and then draw them. But for the moment, we are just going to draw simple shapes. So let's set, for example, a color in, for example, red. This is the same red, green, blue, alpha format with the colors going between 0 to 1. Good. And now we have to say what we want to draw. So MGraphic, we want to make a rectangle. So there is a method called rectangle. We can find it as well inside this online guide, plus actually also in the Max reference. And we have to say where we want to draw this rectangle. Let's say if we want to draw it at coordinates, for example, 10 by 10. This will be the upper left corner. And then we have to say how big should this be. So let's say that we want to have a rectangle that is 40 pixels by 40 pixels. And then it's not over, because since we said autofill 0, we also have to manually call the fill function. So we say fill. Good. Now if I save, there will be a red square appearing here on the window. And look that if I resize my window, the size of the square is not going to change. So in case we want to scale it, when we scale the window, we should scale it manually. For the moment, it's not gonna change. From alone, it's just always going to occupy 40 pixels inside the window. But if I zoom in and out with the scroll wheel, in Max, it will definitely get bigger and smaller. So that's pretty cool. Good. So now let's say that we want to draw this rectangle, this square, at the position of the mouse. So we can do it with another built-in function, which is onDrag. So this is another of the functions that are available for us inside the JSUI object. And onDrag will simply give us the X and Y coordinates of the mouse every time we drag with the mouse on top of the window. So, for example, let's create a global variable. We'll call it mouse position, and this is simply an empty array. And then inside our onDrag function, we say that mouse pos is actually equal to an array containing the X and Y position. So the X position of the mouse will be at position 0 of the array, and the Y1 will be the position 1 in this array. So inside here, we just need to say, instead of these 10 tens for the left top corner, we simply have to say mouse pos 0 and mouse pos 1. Good. So let me make this slightly smaller. Good. So now if I save and I go here, it should actually work, but as you can see, it's not working. It's only changing the position of the mouse when I move the JSUI object around, and that's because the object, so the paint function gets called. When does it get called? Only when the object thinks it has to redraw itself. So for example, when it's moved or when we scroll the window, the object will redraw. But that's not what we want. We want that every time we drag with the mouse and we get some new values, this function gets called. So in order to do that, we have to call another function from MGraphics, which is redraw. So this redraw thing will call the paint function. So every time we call the redraw function, it will call the paint function. So now every time we drag with the mouse, it will call the paint function. And we are drawing our square on the window, we are moving it with our mouse. So pretty cool. Let's say now that we want to draw the square around the mouse. So not placing the mouse on the top left corner, but actually putting it on the center of the square. So what can we do? Let's first create a variable inside our paint function, which we call it square size. And let's say we want this to be 40. Then we basically want to subtract half of that. from the mouse position X and Y. So we are basically shifting the square to the right. And then we just want to use square size here instead of this number that we just wrote. Great. So let's see. Okay, perfect. Now the square is being drawn with the mouse on the center. So that's pretty nice. We could already output the position of our square as values to send on the outlet of the object, which we could then use for whatever we want. For example, move these two sliders. So let's give it a try. On the onDrag function, we want to basically rescale first these values, because by default they just go between 0 and the size of the window. So we want to say our x it's equal to our mouse pos 0. And then if we want this to go between 0 and 1, we should actually divide that by the size of our JSUI window, which at the moment we don't have. So in order to find this size, let's actually create a global variable. Let's call it JSUI size. And this is going to be equal to boxrect2. So boxrect is basically the rectangle that forms our JSUI object in our window, in our max patch. So if I say boxrect2, this is the third element in an array, which is basically the x position of the rightmost corner. So if I want to get what the size of this window is, I have to detract from the right corner the left corner, so the x position. So this will be the rightmost corner minus the leftmost corner. So this is going to be boxrect0. This is going to be the x size. Now for the y size, we just want to subtract to that actually boxrect3. This will be the y position of the bottom right corner. Or actually, doesn't matter if it's right or left. This is just for the y, so the bottom corner minus the y position of the top corner. So this is going to be boxrect1. Great. So now we have the size of... wrong. I forgot to put a parenthesis here. Good. So now it should be okay. So this should now be the size of our JSUI object. Cool. So let's check it out. Basically, let's first make a test. Here, let's just output from our outlet 0. Oh, always autocomplete, messes up with me. The x position of the mouse. Let's see how this looks like. So let me just create a message box. Connect this to the right inlet and see what we get here. Exactly, we get basically the size of the object, plus we also get the position of the mouse, even if it's outside of the JSUI window. So that's a bit inconvenient. So it's much more convenient to have this to go between 0 and 1. So we just need to divide that by the JSUI size 0, which is the x size. And now you can see that the number goes between 0 and 1. So that's pretty good. Apart that they still go beyond the borders, which is something we don't want. But first, before fixing that, let's just create also the y value. So we just copy this line above, and we just need to change the 0 to 1, because now we want the y coordinate of the mouse and the vertical size of the JSUI object. Let's send this out as an array. So it's just going to simply create a list for us. Perfect. And great. Now we got numbers that go between 0 and 1. For the x and the y, we can already attach this to the unpack. And now we can move our sliders. So that's pretty cool. This is not perfect yet. We should add some more. We should add some guards that basically limit the position of the mouse to go beyond the borders and the position of our square, because otherwise it disappears. But we're going to do that and more in the next video, in which we're going to see some more cool stuff we can do with the JSUI object. For the moment, I just wish that this sets you started on your trip with the JSUI object, because it offers really a lot of possibilities. I'm making some complex stuff with it, which allows to have some pretty complex graphical operations happening all in a single box, which is really great, instead of using like a GP world and a JavaScript object attached. So it's a great object to explore. I hope this was useful, and I will see you in the next video. Have fun and see you soon. Ciao.